Good evening, everyone. This talk is a continuation of a talk I gave last year, and I thought I'm going to kick off with a short look back at what we covered last year, and then lead over to my new topic, a sort of continuation. So first here, nothing's working. Let's see if this works. No. All right. So last year my thesis was that the spread of disinformation is not so far correlated with platforms and algorithms and foreign powers, but rather has a lot to do with a decay of democracy. That was the central argument, and I think that still holds. The correlation between disinformation and decay of democracy is very visible, and the new data shows this as well. This is data of the International Varieties of Democracy project, and this graphic shows a correlation between what this project calls regime transformation. Regime transformation is these days often an autocratization, so moving towards autocracy. That's the countries seen here in red. And on both sides you can see regime transformation versus disinformation. And on the right you have political polarization versus start of regime transformation. And what you can see is the data from 2014 on the lower right and 2024 on the top left. So you can see here at first it's obvious that there's many more countries where this correlation of regime transformation and a high amount of disinformation, but also especially polarization, the number of countries has grown versus 2014. The ones that are marked gray are the ones that didn't have any large difference regarding regime transformation. Like most of those we see here on the bottom are part of the stable countries. On the top left, you see Russia, top right actually, you see Russia, a very autocratic state, high amounts of disinformation coming from the government. That's an important point. This data is looking at disinformation that's spread by the governments. And if Russia is shown in grayish here, then because it's already almost as bad as it can get, there's no way to hope for an improvement, but also it's really hard to get any worse because the Russian government already has a very strong media control. So what's salient here is that there's strong correlation between disinformation and the autocratization of governments, so the decay of democracy. We can see that in different dimensions. And it affects more and more countries. So that's a short summary of what I showed last year. This year I want to focus on less the surroundings of disinformation and the environments, but more on disinformation itself. And the most important point for me is that disinformation, other than the press often claims, it's not a cognitive failure, but there is a core of political acting in there. And that's not limited only to government, where it makes sense that there's political goals behind disinformation, but also people that consume disinformation, that circulate it, spread it, share it, and very basically interact with this kind of information and sympathize with it. And that's what I want to look at in more detail. But first off, the bridge between last year's talk and this year's is a quote that I also presented last year. Peter Neeson in 2021 said a community that regresses, that whose democracy decays, knows that it decays, and it affirms that transformation. So this reversal of political standards is a deliberate collective decision by citizens and their elected representatives. So we're not just victims of disinformation if we consume it and spread it, but there's something that we want, and that's what I want to focus on when I say disinformation is a political act. To illustrate that, I picked a photo here from a Republican Party from last September in the US, where you can see eat less kittens, vote Republican. So this is a humoristic inversion of a political lie that Donald Trump has claimed, spread shortly before that, where he said that people eating dogs in Springfield, Ohio, the refugees that came in, the Haitians, would slaughter and eat the pets of the people there. And he was referring to, and that's an important aspect, that he said that he saw that on television. And indeed, Fox News or a related station, they had a video where somebody in the council of Springfield claimed that refugees there would hunt and slaughter the ducks in the park. And then Donald Trump took that, picked it up, repeated it several times. There's a lot of memes that came up on the internet there, also including that electoral ad. So eat fewer kittens, eat less kittens, vote Republican. A completely bizarre story that is used in the election run-up, and it's not about the question that we often focus on, read about disinformation. It's not about truth. It's about something else, and that is that Donald Trump picks up stories that he sees on TV, on the internet and social media, and then repeats them, gives them space and visibility, and so creates offers of representation for his supporters. He offers them stories in the hopes that people will refer to them, that they will self-identify with that and use it to mobilize their support. And he often combines that with quoting. A lot of people are saying, it's even a book title now, a phrase he just repeats over and over. A lot of people are saying. And what he means with that is, I'm not saying this. These lies aren't coming from me. I'm just repeating what I heard, what people tell me, and I return them to you, and then you can choose whether you identify with that, whether you can see yourself reflected in that. You with your everyday life, your perceptions of the world that you live in and move in. So this information here becomes sort of a medium in itself that populist politicians, mostly men, use to communicate with their supporters. So the medium is the lie that you use to leave the mainstream and at the same time mark your political position. This information formulates a counter-narrative to what we would call maybe common sense or shared perception of the world of public spaces. Many people probably seen this similar campaign we had here, for example, about the Heizungsgesetz on renewable energy heating, where we had stories with very strong formulations, the heating hammer, the heating Stasi that the Conservative Party used, and that awakened a lot of resentment and mobilized some to create a certain political environment. And the question here is not, is this true or is it false, but does it affect the people? And this information, just like public discourse in general, is often not possible to analyze through the lens of binary truth. And I think the political and also academic debate that we had about the topic of disinformation seems to often ignore that, when their focus is on the quality or the truth value of information. In the political discourse, facts are often embedded in narratives that don't aim for correctness, but that have a political message that they transport. So it's not truth values that are in the foreground, but it's ideologies, it's norms, it's value systems. And that's the point by which we measure political success. Do people get their message across? And whether the facts are correct, whether there's truth in that, usually takes a step behind that. And that's one of the reasons why regulating platforms is having such a hard time to control and define disinformation, especially in places where it is actually causing damage, and eliminate it, because it's a spectrum of the political discourse between outright lies and a framing that is maybe based on conviction or manipulation. So it's a spectrum. It's not a binary
distinction.
A binary. Another example from that context that I find interesting is comes from the Dutch sociologist who looked at the Brexit campaign of Boris Johnson and found that what has begun as an obvious lie, an outright fabrication in the Brexit debate, that Great Britain supposedly sent £350 million per week to the EU, and if they only leave the EU, they would save that money and put it to better use, for example, for the British health system. So this story that started as an outright lie has, through the target audience of this campaign, through the citizens, it has taken on a certain quality of truth and conviction that people that read that have filtered their own experiences with the health system that has ever fewer less and less coverage underperforms, that tracks with their own perception. So that gave this campaign authenticity. It made it credible. So this lie that the health system can be improved in this way has gained some sort of agreement through this lie. So did that work? Obviously, no. The British health system is even in an even worse position than it did before Brexit. And of course, people had a choice. They could have listened to experts. They could have trusted experts that made the calculations for them, that showed them that Brexit would make them poorer and not richer. But instead, they chose to believe Boris Johnson's campaign. And in this way also helped to succeed. So this Dutch sociologist says the target audiences of disinformation campaigns are also always active participants. They don't just have to agree with, they have to agree to stories that they could also disagree with. Somebody else called this effective investment. You connect these lies, these narratives with your own experiences, your own realities of life, and then you make them your own and follow them. So this way, populist narratives and networked interpretive communities come into being that follow that reject certain standards of established scientific labor, and they follow the so-called alternative facts and trust them. So indeed, under followers of populist politics, there is a very strong rejection of knowledge elites in favor of a personalization of trustworthy interpretations of the world, rejecting like traditional science is something you can see very well in the US at the moment, where there is a cultural struggle against the elitist universities at the East Coast, most recently Harvard in the news. But you can also see it in the resentments that populist politicians against scientific research and findings of all kinds, whether in the health sector, such as vaccinations, or statistics about climate change, that are just outright rejected. And some observers even see a sort of demand for epistemic autonomy, where new communities spring up that recommend alternatives to vaccinations, that work on them, try to spread them.
What's interesting is that this personalization of trust towards politicians, but also stakeholders, experts with knowledge, this isn't something new. You can find these practices of scientific evaluation much earlier. Let me show you this cover of a scientific historian, Stephen Chapin, who published this book in the 90s that's called The Social History of Truth. And he poses the central question how to approach life, whom to trust, because it's obvious that no one can know everything, and you always have to put your trust in third parties and trust in their expertise. So he's saying knowledge is always within a moral field. You have to trust someone to produce reliable knowledge. So knowledge is a collective good, and relationships of trust between people is a central condition for its production and reproduction. And what he constructs historically is the inevitable role of people knowledge in theme knowledge. In the earlier 20th century and back into the 17th century, the free gentleman was the guarantee of true knowledge, someone who embodied virtue, and what those people knew that was considered reliable. And this personification of knowledge was valid up until the early 20th century, which is when this whole thing shifted. And the personalization of knowledge shifted into a systemic trust. So it's no longer a person who is who guarantees authenticity, it's institutions. We have something like quality media, universities, standards of scientific reproduction. So we have a shift from the personalized knowledge to institutionalized knowledge. And we're relying on the good reputation of universities or persons who graduated from these universities and represent them. So what you can see among politicians is that they're falling back into the pattern of personalized politics and personalized trust in knowledge. So Trump can lie because people trust him and are loyal to him by saying, I accept your worldview as mine and I trust you. And for me, this is the central point. Disinformational narratives contain political messages. They express mistrust in established institutionalized standards of knowledge, representation, and interpretation of the world. Instead, they embody an active readiness to participate in the form of personalized trust. And this is something we can see in many countries, not just in the US. We're seeing that in Hungary. We've seen it in Poland. We're seeing it in many people that where autocratic governments take control, where politicians take control, that they shift the trust towards their own person and their own word interpretation. They take away the power from the free press and they invite people to trust them and them only. And this is where popularity meets charismatic leaders. Max Hegel wrote about that. The pre-modern political figure was the charismatic figure, and this charismatic political leader finds its equal in postmodern ways of finding truth. So there's a substantial correlation between politics on the one hand and sympathizing with misinformation on the other hand, and this personalized trust and going away from established norms. So Trump can say, I have the biggest assembly of people ever, and people will just believe it, at least those who vote for him. So they suspend their ability to differentiate between right and wrong and just follow this person. So it's very clear that this personalization of political rules and epistemical rules of knowledge representation are non-democratic. But it's important to me to make the following point. Disinformation doesn't just produce victims, but co-perpetrators who use disinformation as a means to oppose knowledge elites and the establishment and support populist politicians. Thank you very much. Jeanette Hofmann, thank you very much. So you finished early. I didn't realize. Are there any questions from the audience?
Ja, vielen Dank. Mich würde interessieren.
I would be interested. are there any strategies you can derive from that? Well, negatively, I would reply that fact-checking is ineffective in changing people's convictions if they've already accepted disinformation as their political agenda against the elites of knowledge. So the question would be, how do you oppose those people? I think disinformation is just an ornament. It's not the root cause. This is what I said last year. If we see that disinformation is an indicator of decay of democracies, this is what we have to work with. Why do people turn away from their democratically elected parties? Why is the young generation turning away from the political middle and tending towards the extremes? And why do they reject knowledge elites? And the structural reasons in Germany are obvious. We have a school system, a educational system that reproduces elites and is opaque towards people who are marginalized today. So from that perspective, you can understand why people harbor resentment against forms of knowledge that they feel excluded from and that they feel do not listen to them. So I don't want to say that you should stop fact-checking. Fact-checking, it makes sense for people who react to it, but the majority of those who share disinformation don't care whether it's true or not. They just make up their own truths. Yeah, I have a similar question. Strategic answers to the knowledge we just gained. We've talked about the educational system, but this problem is being pushed into non-importance. Can the answer be to put trust into other people, or what can we do in the short term? I think basically personalization, Stephen Shaken himself said that personalization of trust will never fully go away. And yeah, everyone knows that from work, right? That some people are just trusted more than others without discrimination. So there's always personalization of trust, but this is something bad when many people make this a central way of approaching things. I think disinformation in Germany is also a media artifact because media make it bigger than it actually is. In the last few years, we've seen a few campaigns like the one against the radiator law that was an organized campaign, not really by politicians, but you could see that several established media collaborated to create a campaign, and the answer to that would be, I think, a pluralized media landscape. This is not a structurized answer, but I think you can only find structural answers to those problems. Individual people can't oppose these developments that are seen in many, especially OECD countries. So there's no short-term strategy, which will be disappointing to you. But I'm afraid of what will happen when our media landscape develops backwards, in the sense that the regional newspapers die and established media don't work anymore, and populist parties especially are attacking the public broadcasting services and trying to take away their financing. One last question. Very shortly. Very nice presentation. I just wanted to ask one question. Bloch said in RTL that we've lost our emotion. So why democratic populism? Sorry, difficult to understand. It's interesting. There are people where we've always had populism, and this term is more negatively connotated in our countries than in others. In Latin America, there's a long tradition of democratic populism, and we can't gain anything good from that. But there's literature on populism where there's a few authors who would say populism is nothing else than the attempt to represent people in their actions and their perceptions, and that means binary arguments of a corrupt elite that is detached, supposedly. So that's not exactly what my own position, but this is the rhetorical pattern that populist parties use. But generally, it would be desirable that politics gets more comfortable with the people who vote them and get to know them. Thank you very much. Jeanette